Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Jessica Rimmons. I am the Director of Communications for the National Cybersecurity Student Association. So I figured what better topic to talk about than business communication and cybersecurity. I feel like it's a really important topic because it's something that a lot of schools, the program doesn't really build that side of things into your program. So it's important to be able to communicate effectively, because if you have the knowledge there but then you can't communicate effectively, you're not going to be able to do your job as easily. It makes it more difficult and it makes it harder to share. So I just kind of want to go over some of the things from my experience and my research. I'll give you a little bit of an introduction about myself so that you understand why I'm qualified to discuss these topics, and just to give you some more background information on me. So my name is Jessica Rimmons. I am the Director of Communications with the National Cybersecurity Student Association. I've been with the National Cybersecurity Student Association for over a year now. It's been about a year and a half, and I'm loving it. The position is great. It fits me pretty well. I like to go on LinkedIn and share different articles that I find while I'm doing research for work, and also the articles that we write. My last article that I wrote, I was just talking about being a woman in the cybersecurity field and my experience and how I have a positive view, because I know a lot of times you hear about the negative side of things. So that was my most recent blog article that they just posted, and if you want to, go check it out on cyberstudents.org. Another thing too, I'm also a student at University of North Texas. I have 3 more semesters left, so I'm almost done. I have my associates in computer forensics and network security. I got that at John A. Logan College in Southern Illinois. Great school. I don't know if we have any Southern Illinois fans or anything watching, but it's a great school and I really had a great experience there, and I'm having a great experience at UNT. Hopefully everybody else is having a good semester so far. So right now, as I'm at UNT, I have a business communication course, and we had to do research for one of our first assignments. We had to do research on the importance of communication in our field, and I never really thought about that before. It's obviously important to be able to communicate effectively, but whenever you think about it from our perspective, our field, it's really important. Because we're sharing all this information and we're gathering all this data. We have to be able to do something with it. We have to be able to help others with it. So in addition to that, I'm also working for a financial institution. I'm a operations analyst, so I've been there for about 9 months now, and I love it. It's a great fit for me, and I'm really loving the cybersecurity field so far. So one of the things that I noticed whenever I was doing research is that there are a lot of ways that we can get information and share information in the cybersecurity field. So you have FSISAC, you have different associations, for example, the National Cybersecurity Student Association. We have ISSA, all these different avenues that we can communicate with each other. We have Facebook Live, like this, for example. So it's important to be able to know who you're communicating with, like your end users, if you have end users, or if you're just purely research. You have to be able to identify that so that you know the best way to communicate with each party. So kind of want to break it down for y'all, and I will discuss the importance. One of the things that I noticed is whenever I joined the ISSA recently, they have there are different resources that they have for students and members, and one of the things that jumped out at me is they have something called Mind Edge. So they have a partnership with Mind Edge, and one of the first things on there was a certificate in business communication. So that to me says, okay, clearly communication is really important. So much so that to have a certificate showing that you understand business communication, the importance of it, and how to be the most effective communicator, it's a big deal. So what I'm going to discuss is the types of communication in business, people we're going to work with in varying fields, technical jargon, how to break it down so it's easy to understand for people that aren't as technical as us, but we also don't want to dumb it down, because we don't want to talk down to anybody. We don't want to be that guy from the video they made us watch in college where I can't remember his name, but if you guys know his name, share it, because that guy's hilarious, but don't do that. But also, we have to be able to talk in the correct tone and explain things at a more high level, technical level, especially when we're doing intelligence sharing, things like that. But you also have things like, public speaking, you have presentations, memos, and reports. I mean, all kinds of things, all kinds of ways to communicate. So I would say primarily, most of the time we email. Email is probably the top way that I communicate at work. We have IM, we use that a lot, but that's more of like interpersonal, with my colleagues, and I don't really communicate with the end users using IM just because they might not use IM, they might not even know that they're signed into IM. So email is the most effective way. If someone's out of office, email's really quick, it's right on their phone. But you also have to remember when you're emailing, you don't want it, it's not a letter, you don't want it to be really lengthy, but you also, you want to have enough detail to where you don't have 10 emails. You don't want to lose an email somewhere and then be like, what are you talking about? And get confused. So those are the things you have to be cognizant of. But also you have like face-to-face, and then you also have internet meetings. So that's one thing we use a lot for the NCSA, National Cybersecurity Student Association. Sorry, I shorten it sometimes, it's really long. But we use WebEx. So that for us is a great tool because we live all over. We're the National Cybersecurity Student Association, so we have people, in Wisconsin, Arizona, in the East Coast, all over. So this is, the most effective way for us to communicate. And you not only have to know how those tools work, but you also have to understand, how to utilize them the best way. So, for example, with WebEx, you have a presentation board you can draw on. You can share your screen, you can let someone take over control. There are a lot of different features, just within that method of communication. And it's important to know the best way to utilize those, going into it. You also have telephone, so when you're talking over the telephone, I know that's one thing, that's an advantage of talking on the phone, is you can hear, you can kind of tell the tone a little bit better. So in email, you kind of lose that. So that's why it's important to be able to understand, the best way to communicate over email versus phone. Sometimes with phone also, things can get misunderstood as well. So you just have to be able to deal with that and identify that whenever you notice it happening. Another type of communication that I have experience with is writing articles. So especially if you're doing a lot of research, you have to be able to write technical papers and and white papers and all of that, so that you can share with the majority your findings, and not only writing papers like for school since we're students, but I mean you might have to write a paper to your boss, to explain, okay, this is the tool that I found and this is why it's awesome, and here's why we need it. You have to build the business case on it and be able to communicate that, because you can find something that it would be a perfect match for your company, but if you can't sell it, if you can't even sell it to your boss, how is she going to be able to sell it to someone above her, to the higher ups executives who make the call? So when I go back to how important this is, it really is important, and it's one of those things that you don't think about, how important communication is in cybersecurity. So just based on my experience in my field so far, and after doing some research for this paper that I wrote, I was like, wow, I really need to talk about this, because I think it's a great, it's a great tool. It's a great information, it's great information to share with all of you, because I know a lot of programs are really technical, and it's science and math, and they might not have as many things, related to like technical writing. For example, whenever I came to UNT, we had to take some core classes, and I had to pick, some English-related course. Well, they had all these English-related courses, and I found technical writing, and I was like, that's perfect for me. So that's one of those things you have to think about whenever you're building out your courses. If you have a choice, pick something related to like technical writing, technical presentations, business communication, if possible. Anything related to that is really going to help you in your field, or in our field. So some of the people you'll probably work with in your field, it just depends. Like I'm in the financial sector, so you also have like the educational sector, you have like energy and all these different sectors. There are a lot. If you're doing research, something like that, you kind of have to shape it based on that. But I mean, it's one of those things, it's better to be prepared for it than whenever you get out there and you're like, whoa, this is a totally different way of communicating. For example, when I started my job, I was used to giving presentations at my college. We would give we had community events where we would, teach children about cybersecurity and, how to be safe online, playing games online. So you communicate at a different level there, and then you come into this environment that's very technical, and you're used to talking down here, and then you kind of have to switch it, right? So for me, that was an adjustment. I had an adjustment period. It took me about a month to be able to get to where, instead of, I don't know how to explain it the best way, but that way, whenever you go into a new job, you're not, talking at this level, and then you have to explain things at a better, at a higher level. And it's just a lot more efficient whenever you prepare for it that way. So, going back to people you're working with. Okay, so you have coworkers, which with coworkers, you kind of, after a while, when you've been working on a team for so long, you kind of just mesh. So you're able to just kind of get each other, like you read each other and you understand. But it takes a while to get to that point. But you still have to have a way to communicate, so like I said, IM's big, email's really big. And then also for where I work, we use a wiki, which is a huge helper. And I really encourage you to use a wiki if possible. Seems like a lot of work to set up. Luckily, my boss set it up. But it's a great way where we can all, include what we're working on right there. So my boss, if she has a question, did somebody do this? She can just go straight to that wiki and look at it. But you also have to know, what's important to include in a wiki. Do you want to have like a paragraph, or do you want to have a sentence? So it's kind of figuring that out and knowing, what exactly to include where. So whenever you're talking to end users, it's important, especially where I work, we have different levels of end users. So we have, executives, and then we have, just the end user, we have, tellers and bankers and loan officers and all of that. So you have to know, each one is going to be different. You have younger and you have older, and some are going to be less technical. Some are even, just technical as you. Maybe they started out in IT and they're like, this is not for me. I'm going to go this other way. So you kind of have to read them, but you also have to talk at like this, just a base level, to where you're not talking down, because you don't want to do that. You don't want to offend anybody. We're not assuming anybody isn't technical, but we just have to be cognizant of that. But you also don't want to be too technical to where they're like, what are they talking about? And then they freak out. So say, for example, we have a phishing inbox that I investigate. So sometimes we have malicious emails that we have to contact end users about. But it's important to know, whenever you're typing up an email to somebody, to say, hey, can you delete this email? Don't click on anything. If you did, let us know so we can look into it some more. Whenever you're communicating with them, you have to be very careful, because you don't want them to freak out, because then you're gonna have, you're gonna have to get all these other people involved. Their manager's gonna be freaking out, and they're gonna get help desk involved. Whenever you can isolate it and just handle it right then and there, as long as nothing crazy happens. But like I said, it's just being aware of your end user and knowing how to communicate with them in the best way, so that they don't, they can detect that sense of urgency, but you also don't want them to panic. So you got to be careful, and you have to know that balance. So another thing is, in cybersecurity, I work a lot with the IT department. We're integrated with the IT department, so we have to be able to communicate with them. So say there's a vulnerability that was released, and we need them to go, integrate this patch that we have. And if you're not able to communicate that it's like a really big deal, or something that's like an easy patch, it's going to make it harder for them to do it, because they're really busy. I mean, it's the IT department. They're just like us. They're super short-handed, lots of work to do, not enough time. So being very efficient and, being concise and being able to explain, why this is important, but not being too wordy, it's, that's a good skill to have. So if you're able to communicate effectively in that way, definitely, think about that whenever you're communicating with them. So another thing that we use to communicate, another avenue we use to communicate is intelligence sharing. So, for example, InfraGard, with them, they're communicating a lot with us, but it's also a two-way street. So we have to be able to communicate to them, and then they communicate to us. So, say we find something, or FS ISAC as well. I know that my boss works with them a lot, so, she has to know how to communicate with them, something, we found, or, just kind of what's going on in our side of the world, the financial sector. So being able to identify those different avenues and knowing the best way to communicate at which time is very important. So another thing I want to talk about was technical jargon. So, for example, we use a lot of abbreviations at my work, and I'm sure it's probably like that in a lot of the IT field. It's just a lot easier, after a while you just it's second nature to say just the abbreviation instead of spelling it out. But if you're talking to maybe a student, for example, whenever I just started college, a lot of these things I was just learning the term, let alone the abbreviation for it. So, over time you kind of adjust, and you learn how to shorthand things, and makes it much quicker. But then whenever you have somebody new coming in, you have to be able to think about that, and you have to be able to break it down so that they see, okay, this is what you're talking about, instead of them being like, what do you mean, what is TCP, which, anyway, I digress. But yeah, so it's important not to use too much jargon, unless you're with really technical people. That's common for you guys. But I would say normally let them open that door, just to be safe, because you don't want to start spouting out these terms and they don't know what they are. So better safe than sorry in that regard, just for the sake of efficiency. And then as you adjust and you learn how to communicate better with each other, then you can throw those in. So another thing that I wanted to talk about is if you're, especially with cybersecurity students, we're writing a lot of papers, and maybe the teacher, maybe the teacher's used to reading things that are related to cybersecurity, but maybe they're not. So you have to think about that and include a glossary. For example, I had a report in my technical writing course where, it was a huge report. It was like 30, 40 pages, and we had to include a lot of technical terms that that teacher may not have known. It's a technical writing course, so they get everybody. So we had to break it down and include the glossary, so that they knew, okay, I don't know what this is, I'm going to go look it up. And that's a great resource to have for them, because then they don't have to go out to the internet, look it up. It's all just right there ready for them. So another note that I wanted to add is whenever you're doing any intelligence sharing, you just have to make sure that your management is aware that you're sharing information, just because you want to make sure you're not sharing things that you're not supposed to, especially if you're entry level. You may not realize that this is something that your boss needs to share, not you. So that's one of those things where right now I don't do any information intelligence sharing, just because I don't feel like I'm at the level yet, and also that my boss handles all of that. So luckily I don't have to do any of that, but I know one day I will have to. So it's just one of those things that you got to make sure you're not sharing things that you're not supposed to. And then also making the most of intelligence feeds. So for example, the InfraGard meeting, we discussed how they were working to be better about sharing, and then you go to the platform, and there's all this information, and it's like, okay, what's related to me, what's relevant to me? There's a lot of information out there. So you have all these emails coming in, FS ISAC, what do you do with all that? And you really have to kind of develop a priority. So for example, I go to InfraGard probably once a week, just check it out, see what's going on. But then FS ISAC, I'm checking every day, on the hour, just seeing, what's the latest thing going on. So you just kind of have to develop that based on, your industry and, what your job is. But also, like I said before, communication is not just give or take, it's both. Communication is always two-way, so you have to think about that as well. So if if you're communicating with someone and you're not getting the correct communication back to understand, you have to be able to to work through that, and you have to be able to make sure you're understanding what they're saying, So for example, we had a project at work that it was not communicated effectively to start with, but after a month it took a really long time to get everybody on the same page, just because there was no one really saying, oh, I don't understand this, can you clarify, until finally project manager stepped in and he was like, hey, we need to get this going, what's going on? So we all got together and we figured it out. But the thing is if we could have just identified from the get-go that there was a communication error, we could have saved ourselves a couple weeks, and that's a big deal, especially when you're talking business. Weeks, a week is a long time, so a lot can get done in a week, and that's one of those things. I would rather experience that and be able to kind of give you a forewarning than you have to go into the field and experience that and feel like, man, let down, because that's how learning experiences work. Once you learn, you don't do it again. But unfortunately it does have a negative impact, so you just kind of want to think about that. So in closing, I haven't noticed any questions so far, but if anyone has any questions while I'm on here, feel free to ask. I'm wrapping up the presentation now. I covered all my topics, but if you have any questions, if you watch this at a later time, because I know we post these on YouTube, you can just email me. I think my email address should be on the cyberstudents.org website under, I can actually go to it really quick and double check. If it's not on there, I will just leave a comment for y'all so that you can find it. But we also have our LinkedIn page for the National Cybersecurity Student Association. And then we have our next Facebook Live event on September 30th, so be sure to check that out. Also, any of our recordings that we have for our past presentations, you can find those on YouTube. So I just want to thank y'all for joining, and I'll go ahead and just leave my email in the comments, just so if anyone has any questions later that they can follow up with those. And then when we post this on YouTube, if anyone has any questions from there, we can include a document, has the additional information on it in the outline. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed.